apply this into a drawing to make something look hyper realistic, meaning very realistic, giving the illusionistic feel that it's there. So I've taken this image, it's just a bunch of tools, but I've cropped it so we're not distracted by what it is, and instead we can just focus more on values and shapes. So the first thing that I want you to do in your sketchbook is you're going to make a 3" by 3" square. So taking a ruler or some sort of straight edge, go ahead and make a 3" by 3" square with a pencil. It doesn't matter what type of pencil it is. So once I have my pencil, we're going to begin. Instead of just going straight in with pen, I think it's really useful for us here to first break this down. So I might do this in my head, but since I have out my nifty tool here, I'm going to start by dividing this into 4 quadrants. Right there. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing in my square super lightly because we're eventually going to get rid of these marks. So I'm going to divide my image into a square to help me. Now at this point I can start looking for bigger shapes. So I might start off here. If I need to know where this diagonal line is, I want to see where it hits within the square. So I'd say it's about 1/3 of the way. So let's see, 1, 2, about 1/3 of the way here, and maybe a little less than halfway up here. And then that'll help me figure out where that diagonal is. I'm going to notice that this is about halfway down. So mark halfway down there and connect it down here. Then I'll do the same thing here, noticing that this diagonal stems from sort of the bottom of where this line was, and it comes up, I would say, about halfway between here and here. Halfway between here and here. Since I know it's a straight edge, I might as well just use a ruler to help me. I always feel like we forget that a ruler is available to us. It's not cheating if you use a ruler. It's just there to help you. Then let's go ahead and draw this other diagonal here. So if this is about halfway, it's maybe just shy, so halfway, coming over a bit, maybe marked right about there. And I'm going to say that it hits, if this is halfway, maybe about 1/4 of the way up here. So I'll connect that line, something like this, so like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing with all the other shapes, looking for where it's hitting the grid, looking for relationships, asking myself, where does that fall, and connecting the lines. So go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back in a second. Remember that the point of this is to set us up for our pen scribbling. So if at this point it's not already beginning to look like what you're intending to draw, that's a big no-no, it's a big red flag. So take as much time as you need in this phase. And as I always like to say, if something looks funny or something looks off, it probably is. So it's important to take the time to get it right at this stage because it's really going to set you up for success. If you're having a hard time, you can always break these squares down even farther. I could break this one down into 4 more quadrants. I could break this down into 4 more quadrants. You can also turn the image upside down to help you, or turn yourself upside down. Not on your head, but just like flip to the other side of the table. And make sure to mark in the most that you can. So I didn't mark in every single detail of this white area here, but I marked in just sort of the general outside shape. And while I didn't mark in every detail back here, I just marked in where I saw the major planes. So if your drawing doesn't look like this right now, go ahead and pause this video even more and take some more time to get there. If you're ready to move on, the next thing I'm going to do is get rid of any unnecessary lines. So I might take away my grid lines with my eraser. Anything that was overlapping that I no longer need, I'm also going to get rid of. If there are any corrections or any stray marks that you made that need erasing or lightening up, this is also a good time to do that too. If you drew a little darker than you should have, then you can also take your eraser and just really lightly, like I'm not even pressing down, I'm just letting the weight of the eraser do the work. Really lightly lighten everything up. This way, when we go ahead and go in with our pen, it's not going to be fighting with the pencil. Really, really lightly. I don't want to erase it too much so that you guys can't see it, but if I were doing this as my own drawing, I would make it so that it's barely just visible to me. Wipe that off. Now we're going to go back in with our ballpoint pen here. We're going to start scribbling. You could do this one of two ways. Some people like to start with their lighter values. Some people like to start with their darker values. It kind of depends. I tend to think that it's nice to start with your darker values so that way you establish the value range, meaning you get what's going to be really light and you get what's going to be really dark in right away. So to help myself and to know that I'm getting in a full value range, I'm going to create a little value scale above my drawing. So just like what we did with the notes, I want to mark in the dark value. I want to mark in my semi-dark value. I want to mark in my mid-tone value, my light value, my lightest value, and then my highlight. So now, as I'm drawing, I'm going to be asking myself, where do I see my darkest value? And I see my darkest value in here, I see it in here, I see it a little bit in here in this inner edge. Where do I see my lightest value? My lightest value is right here. Where do I see my light values? So like in here, and in here, and in here, and then midtones are sort of scattered all around. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my darkest value. And I'm going to start by doing some smaller areas just so we can get used to and feel comfortable with this process. So taking my pen, I'm going to start in with this little ridge, and I'm going to make small, controlled scribble marks. I'm not pressing down very hard here, but that'll just depend sort of on what pen you're using, but I'm not finding that I have to press down too hard with my pen. Anytime you are drawing something realistically or trying to make something look illusionistic, you should spend just as much time looking at your photo as you should be looking at your drawing. If you are just looking at your drawing the whole time and abandon the photo, it's not likely that it's going to turn out exactly like what you're aiming to draw, right? So you have to keep correcting, keep checking yourself, not taking your drawing for granted. So I'll start in with that. Then I'm going to move in up here to get this dark crease in the corner. Enough, asking myself, does this match my darkest value? And it does. Then I'm going to start working on this inner area in here. So I'm going to make, since it's a slightly larger area, I might make larger scribbles. So not always, just because something's a big area. If you want it to be really tight and controlled, you could do little marks, but I'm going to work a little bit bigger since it's a larger area. When I get up to those areas where I see a value shift, I'm just going to pause and ease off the pressure, and I'll deal with those later. For the sake of time, I'm just going to pause right there and I'm going to move on to a mid-tone area just so we can kind of see how this is all going to come together. So I'm going to go into this lighter shadow here. Still want to press down, but not as hard because this is not as dark of a value. Now remember, it's not only about pressure, but it's also the denseness of your scribble that is going to give you a darker value. So I'm making this a bit less dense. And if you mess up, don't worry about it. That's why we're practicing, just to get an idea. And now I'm going to move into this lighter value here so we can see what that's going to look like. Lift this up. Okay. Now since this is lighter, I'm barely pressing down, like barely, barely, barely. And I'm moving my pen around. And this is the approach that I would take to the whole entire drawing. So you're going to continue. I'm going to do some video magic here so you can get an idea of where we're going, but this is the same process you're going to be following. Really analyzing every area, taking a look at what do you see as light, what do you see as dark, using your value scale for reference. As I approach the end of my drawing, there are a few things I need to ask myself. Now that I have what I think is a general framework for what I'm drawing here, I need to check myself and really objectively look at the values. So the first thing that I would do is I would say, are all of my darks dark enough? And I would say no, I don't think that they are. I think that this area overall needs to get darker to push back in space, particularly here. I think this is pretty dark, this looks good, this looks good. This maybe could get a bit denser, and I think this value could get a little bit darker too. Then asking myself, are all of my whites in place? This white is in place, right? This edge is maintained. This edge is maintained, even though the shape might be a bit off. This white is maintained. If I want to make this edge a little bit sharper, I might make what's around it a little bit darker. So checking yourself. Don't just be like, okay, well, I did it, I'm done. You really have to look and be like, wait, is everything right? Is everything correct? If by the end of the block you don't have enough time to finish the entire thing, that is okay. If you just want to focus on maybe half the image or do as much as you can, I'm really more interested in quality over quantity.